All right, everyone, let's dive into Empyrean again. This time, we're taking a look at Onyx Storm. That's book 3 in Rebecca Yarros' series. You know, the one with dragons and all that, the one that's got everyone talking. We've got a fantastic review to go over, and there are even some thought-provoking questions in there. I'm excited to get into it all.
This series seems to have really captured people's imaginations. And from what I've seen, Onyx Storms kicks things up a notch.
Oh, for sure. Violet's journey is about to get way more complicated. It's not just training exercises anymore. The rebellion is in full swing now, and there are threats everywhere, both inside and outside the winglets.
Yeah, the review talked about how Onyx Storm explores the fallout from the early victories we saw in the previous books. The world expands, the relationships get more intense, and you really start to feel like the stakes are higher than ever.
And speaking of high stakes, did you see that bit about a possible Empyrean cinematic universe? Apparently, Amazon is already working on an adaptation. I mean, can you imagine these dragon battles on the big screen?
Wow, that would be something else. There's definitely a cinematic quality to Yarros' writing, especially when she describes the aerial combat. And that whole world she created, Navarre, is so vast and detailed.
Okay, so picture this. Navarre on the big screen, dragons flying everywhere. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've got a lot to discuss about the book itself.
For sure. Onyx Storm looks like it's packed with everything that makes fantasy so exciting. Intense action, tons of lore, complex characters, and of course a good amount of romance, too.
Yeah, the review mentioned how the romance is even more intense in this one, especially between Violet and Xaden. I'll admit, I love a bit of forbidden love, especially when it's set against a backdrop of war and rebellion.
Forbidden love, it's such a classic trope, but there's a reason it works so well. It speaks to that desire for connection and intimacy, especially when everything around you is dangerous and uncertain. But what I find interesting here is how Yarros ties the romance into those bigger themes, like destiny versus free will.
Exactly. So it's not just two people falling for each other. It's about them figuring out their place in this huge conflict and questioning whether they even have any control over their own fate.
Precisely. And that theme of destiny versus free will plays out in some fascinating ways. In Onyx Storm, for example, remember how Violet was forced into the winglets at first? Well, now she's choosing to fight, to rebel. But there are these hints that even her rebellion might be part of some larger prophecy that she doesn't fully understand.
That's a really good point. It makes you wonder, is she really making her own choices? Or is she just fulfilling a destiny that's already been laid out for her?
It's a question that goes beyond this particular book. It's something we all wrestle with in our own lives. Are we truly free to make our own choices? Or are there forces beyond our control shaping our paths?
Wow, that got deep pretty quickly. But you're right, it adds a whole other layer to what Violet's going through. And the review mentioned some other heavy themes too, like power, sacrifice, and the toll that war takes. It even suggested that the book could be really intense emotionally, maybe even heartbreaking for some readers.
Yeah, it seems like as the rebellion gains momentum, Violet and Xaden are faced with tougher and tougher decisions. The review hinted at some pretty heavy losses and betrayals, choices that really test their loyalty and force them to confront the harsh realities of war.
So it's not just exciting dragonflights and big victories. There's real danger and uncertainty in Onyx Storm.
Absolutely. Yarros doesn't hold back when it comes to showing how war affects people and their relationships. And this is where the idea of sacrifice becomes really powerful. Both Violet and Xaden have to make hard choices, maybe even sacrificing their own happiness for the greater good.
You know, that reminds me of one of the discussion questions from the review. It asked, how does Onyx Storm explore the cost of war and rebellion? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's pretty clear from the review that this book digs into the moral complexities of conflict. We see how war pushes characters to examine their values, their loyalties, and the limits of their strength.
It sounds like Onyx Storm doesn't sugarcoat the realities of war at all, but the review also praised the intricate world building and how it goes even deeper into the dragon lore and mythology this time around. I'm curious to hear more about that.
One thing that stood out to me was how much emphasis there is on the unique bond between dragon and rider. It's not just about controlling a powerful beast. It's this deep, almost symbiotic connection.
So it's more than just cool flying creatures. It's about this profound connection that affects both the rider and the dragon.
Exactly. And in Onyx Storm, we get to learn even more about the nature of this bond. The review hinted at some revelations about the origins of dragons and the role they played in shaping the world's history. It's not just about fire-breathing and aerial combat anymore. It's about understanding the true essence of these creatures.
That reminds me of another question from the review. It asked, what role do dragons play in shaping the fate of the world? It sounds like they're much more than just weapons of war.
Definitely, they seem to be woven into the fabric of this world. Their existence influences the balance of power. and maybe even holds the key to understanding ancient prophecies.
Wow, just thinking about all the possibilities is giving me chills. But hold on, we need to talk about a few things before we get too carried away.
You're right. While Onyx Form clearly has a lot to offer, it's worth acknowledging that it might not be for everyone.
Exactly. We talked about how emotionally intense it can be, which could be overwhelming for some people. And even though the review praised the romance, it also mentioned that the balance between romance and action might not be for everyone. Some readers might want more of one or the other.
That's a valid point. Everyone comes to a book with their own preferences and expectations.
So think about what you're looking for in a fantasy novel. Do you prefer nonstop action or a slow burn romance? Do you like really intense emotional scenes or something a little lighter?
Those are all things to consider before diving into Onyx Storm. Our goal is to give you the information you need to decide if it's right for you, but ultimately, the choice is yours.
Well said. But I have a feeling that even if this book isn't for everyone, it's going to spark some interesting discussions. What are your initial impressions?
I'm particularly interested in how Yarros blends those big themes, like destiny, free will, and sacrifice, with the intimate details of Violet and Xaden's relationship.
It's a powerful combination, and with all this talk of ancient prophecies and powerful dragons and forbidden love, it's clear that Onyx Storm has a lot to offer readers, especially those who are ready to be swept away by an epic fantasy adventure.
Definitely. It's a story that promises to challenge our assumptions, to test our limits, and leave us thinking about the complexities of war and love, and the choices we make when faced with overwhelming odds.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've only just scratched the surface of what Onyx Storm has in store. Are you ready to go deeper into this dragon-filled world?
I am. Lead the way.
All right, so we've covered the big picture stuff, themes, romance, that whole cinematic universe thing. But I want to dig into some specifics. What really stood out to you about Onyx Storm based on this review?
Well, one thing that grabbed my attention was how Yarros handles the character development, especially with Violet. She's come such a long way from that hesitant recruit. Now she's a leader, willing to challenge authority and make tough decisions.
That's a great point. It's not just about her skills as a dragon rider getting better, it's about her growing as a person. She's dealing with responsibility and facing the consequences of her actions.
Exactly. The review actually mentioned a scene where Violet has to make a strategic call, and it leads to some pretty heavy losses. It's a heartbreaking moment. But it really shows how much she's grown as a leader. She's realizing that sometimes even the best choices have a cost.
Wow, that sounds intense. It definitely ties back into those themes we were discussing earlier. The cost of war, the burden of leadership. It's not all glory and easy victories. There are tough choices and sacrifices along the way.
Yeah, and those tough choices seem to go beyond just the battlefield. The review hinted at some betrayals and shifting alliances, things that really shake things up. It sounds like Violet can't even be sure who to trust anymore.
That's got to be tough. Not only is she fighting a war, but she's dealing with all this political intrigue and personal betrayals. It's like a fantasy House of Cards, but with dragons.
I see what you mean. But I think what sets Onyx Storm apart is the depth of the relationships. It's not just political maneuvering. It's about the personal connections that are put to the test, and sometimes even broken amidst all the chaos.
Right, and speaking of relationships, we can't forget about the romance. The review called it intense and captivating. What are your thoughts on how things develop between Violet and Xaden in Onyx Storm?
It seems like their relationship is going through some serious trials. They're both under immense pressure. And the review suggests that the war forces them to face some hard truths about themselves and each other.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. So it's not just a simple love story. There's conflict, tension, obstacles to overcome?
Precisely, and I think that's what makes it so captivating. It's not just about that initial attraction. It's about two people trying to navigate a complex and dangerous world together, while also trying to understand their own feelings.
And remember how we talked about destiny versus free will? It seems like that plays a role in their relationship too. Are they truly meant to be together? Or are there forces trying to keep them apart?
That's a really good question. The review mentions some external pressures on their relationship, maybe something to do with political alliances or even ancient prophecies. It seems their love isn't just a personal matter. It could have implications for the whole rebellion.
Now I'm really intrigued. I need to know what happens. But before we get too carried away, let's get back to the dragon lore. I know you're fascinated by that aspect of fantasy. And the review mentioned that Onyx Storm goes even deeper into the mythology surrounding the dragons.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really interested to see how Yarros expands on the concept of the dragon bond. In the previous books, we saw how this bond lets riders communicate with their dragons and share their senses. But it seems like there's more to it than that.
So it's not just about giving commands and flying in formation. It's a deeper connection that affects both the rider and the dragon on a fundamental level.
Exactly. The review hinted at some ancient rituals and forgotten knowledge, things that shed new light on the origins of dragons and their connection to humans. It sounds like we might even learn about different types of dragon bonds, maybe with different levels of power and intimacy.
That's fascinating. It's like each book in this series peels back another layer of this world and its history. And I'm guessing the dragons are more than just powerful weapons. They're key players in everything that's happening.
Absolutely. The review asks a question that I think is crucial to the entire series. What role do dragons play in shaping the fate of the world? Are they just tools for humans to use? Or do they have their own agency and destiny?
That's a great question to think about. It makes me think about the cinematic potential we were discussing earlier. Imagine seeing these intricate dragon bonds brought to life on screen.
It would be amazing. Not just visually stunning, but also incredibly moving. And I think it would add a whole new dimension to the action sequences. It wouldn't just be about explosions and flying around. It would be about the bond between these creatures and their riders, the trust and loyalty they share.
I can picture it now. Those sweeping shots of Navarre, the dragon battles, the emotional intensity of the character interactions. It's all there, just waiting to be put on the big screen.
And the music. I can imagine this incredible score that captures the grandeur of the world and the depth of the emotions.
Oh yeah, the music is so important. But let's not get too lost in our Hollywood daydreams. We still have more to talk about with Onyx Storm. What other details from the review stood out to you?
I was struck by the emphasis on the emotional journeys of the characters. The reviewer used words like heart-wrenching, devastating, and triumphant. It suggests a whole range of emotions and experiences.
Sounds like this book will take readers on quite a ride, and it seems those emotional ups and downs aren't limited to the romance. The reviewer hinted at some pretty significant losses and betrayals, things that affect all the characters.
Yeah, it seems like no one is safe in Onyx Storm. The stakes are high, the battles are brutal, and the emotional toll is heavy. But the reviewer also emphasized the resilience of the characters, their determination to fight for what we believe in, even when the odds are stacked against them.
That's a powerful message. It makes me think about how Onyx Storm might connect with readers on a personal level. We all face challenges in our lives, times when we feel like giving up. But this book seems to offer a message of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a reason to keep fighting.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that draws people to fantasy. It lets us escape into these amazing worlds, but it also offers insights into the human condition. We see ourselves in the struggles of these characters, and their victories inspire us to face our own challenges with courage and determination.
You're right. But before we go too deep into the philosophical side of fantasy, I want to bring up something specific that I'm really curious about. The review mentioned new types of dragon magic being introduced in Onyx Storm. Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. From what I gather, the magic system in Empyrean is tied to the dragon bond. The stronger the connection between rider and dragon, the more powerful their magic becomes. And in Onyx Storm, it seems like we're seeing new expressions of this magic, maybe related to that ancient knowledge that Violet and Xaden discover.
So we're talking new kinds of magic, maybe even like a whole new understanding of how the bond works. That's got to be a game changer. Not just for Violet and Xaden, but for the whole war.
Oh, absolutely. The way magic is used always affects who has power in this world. If Violet and Xaden can unlock new abilities, it could give the rebellion a huge advantage.
That makes me think of one of the discussion questions from the review. It asked, what is the true nature of power in Onyx Storm? It seems like it's not just about strength or military power, it's also about knowledge, understanding these deeper forces.
That's a really interesting point. It makes me wonder, are there any downsides to all this new power? Does it come like a price? We saw in the earlier books how magic can be both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, it's not always a simple path to victory. Sometimes trying to gain more power can backfire. It can even corrupt the people who wield it.
That's a classic theme in fantasy. I'm curious to see how Yarros tackles it in Onyx Storm. Does Violet stay true to herself as her power grows? Or does she face temptations that challenge her values?
Those are great questions to think about as we read the book. It reminds us that even in this fantasy world, it's the human element that's at the heart of the story.
Exactly. And talking about the human element, I think it's worth pointing out that even though Onyx Storm deals with these epic themes of war and rebellion, it also has these moments of quiet intimacy and emotional depth. The review highlighted some scenes where Violet and Xaden connect on a personal level, finding comfort in each other amidst all the chaos.
Oh, I love those moments. They remind us that even in the middle of conflict, love and compassion can still exist. It makes the story feel more human, the characters more relatable.
And those moments of connection become even more precious. When you think about the possibility of loss and heartbreak, we've talked about how Onyx Storm doesn't shy away from showing the harsh realities of war, The review hinted at some really tough losses that can have a huge impact on the characters.
Sounds like it's going to be an emotional roller coaster for readers, but those moments of grief and loss make the victories even more meaningful, right? They show the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely. I think that's what makes Onyx Storm so powerful. It's not just a story about dragons and battles. It's a story about love, loss, and ultimately, hope.
So for our listeners, be prepared for a really immersive experience, one that's going to pull at your heartstrings. Onyx Storm's going to be a wild ride.
For sure. And it's important to remember that this is just one part of a bigger story. The review ended with a hint of what's to come, leaving us with more questions than answers.
I'm already counting down the days until the next book. But for now, let's wrap up our discussion on Onyx Storm. What are your final thoughts based on everything we've talked about?
I think it's safe to say that Onyx Storm takes everything that was great about the first two books and builds on it in exciting new ways. The characters grow even more, the world becomes richer, and there's this heightened sense of urgency as the rebellion faces its toughest challenges yet.
And we can't forget about the romance. It sounds like Violet and Xaden's relationship is more intense and complicated than ever.
Definitely. Their love story is woven into the heart of the narrative, adding an emotional depth that stays with you.
And with the possibility of a cinematic universe on the horizon, the future of Empyrean is looking pretty bright.
I'm excited to see where Rebecca Yarros takes us next.
Me too. So, listeners, if you haven't already, definitely check out Onyx Storm. It's an amazing blend of action, romance, and thought-provoking themes. It'll leave you wanting more. And if you've already read it, we'd love to hear your thoughts, share your reactions, your favorite parts, any questions you're left with, because that's what this deep dive is all about. Starting conversations, connecting with fellow readers, exploring the world of stories together. Until next time, happy reading.